The morning came in quietly the way it usually did on Maple Crest. Thin light slipping through the lace curtains, the faint hum of traffic 2 streets over. A kettle that had learned my timing better than I had. I poured coffee into a stoneware mug I'd bought at a street fair years ago and sat at the walnut table, a notebook open to a clean page. I wasn't planning anything in particular. Lists had always steadied me, bulleted groceries, errands, fragments of thoughts that felt more honest on paper than in my head. The phone rattled against the counter, an unfamiliar local number blinking on the screen. I almost let it pass to voicemail. Habit 1. I swiped. Mrs. Hale, a man asked, polite measured. Evan from Silva & Carmi Renovations. I apologize for calling directly. For larger projects, I confirm progress draws in person or by phone. We're scheduled to move funds this week for the Oswego Lake property. I wanted your authorization before I release anything. The phrase landed like a pebble dropped into still water, small at first, then widening. Oswego Lake property. I repeated, testing the shape of it. And which account do you have listed? The homeowner, reserve, labeled Hale Projects, he said. Paper shuffled on his end, the sound precise. There's also a secondary card linked for ease of purchases. We have a signature on file for a countersign. I just need your go-ahead. I set my mug down so carefully the ceramic barely touched wood. My voice kept its composure, my stomach did not. Would you text me the address you have? I'd like to surprise my family. It would be a shame to ruin the moment by asking too many questions over the phone. A breath, a small hesitation. Of course, Mrs. Hale. Sending that now. The line clicked quiet. I stood for a beat, palms braced on the cool edge of the counter, watching my reflection tremble faintly in the stainless steel kettle. Outside, a crow crossed the sky with rude confidence, black on pale. The text arrived a street in Lake Oswego. I'd never visited a number in an orderly block of houses that somehow already felt expensive. Keys, wallet, notebook. I didn't need to think it through. The body knows certain things before the mind allows the ledger to catch up. I locked the front door behind me and slid into the sedan, the leather seat still warm from yesterday's sun. The route to Oswego stitched itself together from muscle memory and road signs. Riverside to 43, the river widening and narrowing at my right shoulder, a constant I barely registered, except for one flash where the water threw back the late morning light with theatrical brightness. I told myself not to invent explanations. I told myself not to rehearse reactions. Still as I drove, small scenes assembled despite me. Tessa smiling in a doorway I didn't recognize. My name, Eleanor, scrawled on forms I hadn't seen. A neat stack of invoices bearing numbers drawn from an account I was supposed to be the only one tending. Each image flickered and vanished. The road kept unspooling. The neighborhood announced itself with clipped hedges and serious mailboxes newly painted trim, the kind of sidewalks that remembered careful strollers and perfect dogs. I found the address easily, a cedar-shingled craftsman with a newly set white fence and a discreet sign near the curb, Silva & Company, its edges still sharp as if it had been placed that morning. The driveway had been resurfaced. The seams were so clean they looked illustrated. Someone had thought beyond paint and shingles. Someone had planned for permanence. I parked at the curb and let the engine settle. The stillness that followed felt performative, as if the whole street had paused to see whether I would get out. I did. Gravel nicked under my flats. The air had a sweet, wet smell from the sprinklers. The side gate was unlatched, moving almost imperceptibly, not wind, so much as carelessness. I am not proud of the impulse that carried me toward it, only honest about it. I pressed the latch and stepped into the side yard. In the back, beds of roses softened the edges of a stone path that curved to a porch. A kitchen window stood open. Voices floated out in an easy rhythm, 2 women, a rustle of laughter, the tone of people who have practiced being pleased with each other. I edged closer to the window and looked in. Tessa stood at the counter with her sleeves pushed to her elbows, a linen apron tied in a generous bow at the base of her spine. Someone had embroidered her name across the bib in a looping thread. Tessa's kitchen, the possessive smudged by the apron's fold in a way that felt deliberate. Beside her, demonstrating how to level flour with a butter knife, was Maeve Archer, my late husband's mother, precise, even when she pretended not to be. Maeve's hair was twisted into a soft knot. Flour dusted her knuckles. The intimacy of the tableau made me feel suddenly like an intruder in my own story. You don't rush this part, Maeve said, guiding Tessa's wrist. You let the flour sit, then you skim. See, it's patient work. Tessa's laugh bubbled a sound I hadn't heard from her in months. When I cook with you, it doesn't feel like a test, she said. At home, it's always timers and lists. Here, I don't know. It feels like I'm allowed to make a mess. The words were not a knife. Knives are honest. They gleam. They warn. These words were a ribbon that tightened as it settled slow enough that you might forgive the pressure until you couldn't breathe. Of course you're allowed, Maeve said, and leaned her shoulder lightly into Tessa's. This is your space. My hand found the fence post. Paint chalked my palm. I lifted my gaze from the two of them and let it travel the room, new shaker cabinets, a farmhouse sink, a swath of tile, still waiting for grout. On a corner of the island sat a set of color samples fanned like a deck of cards. A notebook lay open to a page of measurements and numbers I knew how to read without moving closer. I had not paid for the tile. I had not chosen the sink. And yet the arithmetic sat there in my daughter's handwriting like a declaration. A part of me, the smaller part, cataloged banalities, the way the window latch stuck halfway, the secondhand mixer in a shade of blue I recognized from an old catalog, the chip in a cereal bowl that someone had decided didn't matter. The rest of me counted backward from 10 until the counting steadied my breath. Tessa tipped the flour into a bowl and for the briefest moment looked toward the window as if some muscle in her neck had tugged on its own. If she saw me, she gave no sign. Maeve lifted a hand, brushed a stray hair from Tessa's temple with a familiarity that pretended to be maternal, and knew exactly how to look like love. I stepped back from the window the way you step back from a ledge, slowly enough not to startle the body into falling. The gate was still ajar when I reached it. I left it that way. On the sidewalk, the sun had found its full voice. The pavement radiated an ordinary heat that felt almost indecent, as if the weather should have offered something solemn in acknowledgement. Back in the car, I closed the door and let the world shrink to a private capsule of glass and fabric and the ticking engine. I did not cry. There is a quiet that comes before tears that is far more informative than the tears themselves. I listened to that quiet until it was finished speaking. Then I started the engine. I didn't point the car toward home. I followed the hill down to the water and turned into a public overlook where the river widened into a bright sheet. Cyclists whispered past. A family argued amiably about sandwiches. The everyday continued performing itself with school play earnestness as if to prove that it could. I set the phone on the passenger seat and watched it for a while as if it might offer advice. The contractor's text still lit the screen, the address hovering in neat type. I pinned the message and added a tiny star to it, a habit left over from work. Mark, what matters, keep the paper trail even when the paper is digital and the trail is only for you. My hands didn't shake now. Coffee does a few favors if you give it room. A dragonfly stitched the air near the windshield, looped and vanished into the glare. I thought of all the ways a story rearranges itself when a single line goes crooked. Signatures become suggestions. Trust gets translated into access kindness, turns into a credit limit. It would be easy to say this was a single failure, a misunderstanding with receipts. It would also be untrue. I shifted the car into drive and eased back onto the road. The map in the dash asked where I wanted to go. I chose a route almost at random, one that would keep the river at my side a little longer. I didn't need it to advise me. The decision I needed had already clicked into place, not loudly, not with the drama of a slammed door, but with the clean, satisfying sound a lock makes when the key finds its tooth. I drove. I kept the river in my peripheral vision until the current slowed the racket in my head. When the quiet came back, not fragile this time, but serviceable, I scrolled to a number I hadn't used in months and pressed call. Parker and Lynn, a receptionist, answered, and then a click. Nadia speaking. It's Eleanor Hale. My voice surprised me by sounding like itself. I need your help with a financial matter tied to a renovation I did not authorize. Nadia didn't waste time on cushions. Start at the beginning, she said, and listened while I laid out the call from Silva and Company. The secondary card, the address in Lake Oswego, the kitchen tableau through the window. Not once did she interrupt. I could hear only the faint skitter of a pen and an occasional page turning. When I finished, she said, all right, 2 priorities. First, you secure the account, architecture, revoke any shared instruments, move reserves into a clean container, and create a barrier that requires your physical token. Second, you collect a clear chronological record statements, authorizations, contractor correspondence, anything with dates and signatures. If the firm is reputable, a hold pending confirmation from the primary account holder should not be adversarial. I'm not planning a fight, I said, though the metal taste in my mouth suggested otherwise. Good, but you are planning to be undeniable. I'll draft a formal notice to Silva and Comey requesting suspension of any draw tied to the Hale Project's reserve, unless accompanied by your explicit authorization. I'll also prepare a letter to your bank's fraud unit. Can you be at your branch today? Yes. Then go now. Use your phone to photograph any suspect authorizations you're shown. Email everything to me as PDFs. One more thing, Eleanor, sign with your full name on all new documents. Make them match. Understood. She dictated her direct email and a subject line for the notices. We ended the call without anything as ceremonial as reassurance. Nadia's version of comfort had always been structural. It suited me. The Multnomah branch of Heritage Pacific had glass walls and chrome rails that tried too hard to look like a set from a future that hadn't arrived. I stepped inside and asked for the branch manager. The receptionist offered water and a practiced smile. Minutes later, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and an overpolished wedding band appeared. "I'm Rowan Alder," he said, ushering me into a small office with a table that insisted on being called a desk. "What brings you in?" I slid my driver's license across the glossy wood and opened the Notes app on my phone. "There's a secondary debit card linked to a reserve called Hale Projects. I need to revoke it. I also need to freeze any pending payments to Silva and Company renovations and transfer the reserve into a new account that requires a security token. I'll be filing a dispute regarding unauthorized authorizations." Alder adjusted his glasses but didn't look surprised. "Let's pull up your profile." He turned his monitor enough that I could see as he navigated. "All right," he murmured. "I do see a secondary card issued a year ago. It's been used for test transactions, gas stations, hardware, a few home goods charges." He clicked a different tab. "And here's a scheduled draw to Silva and Company for Friday. I can place a hold on it pending primary authorization." "Place it," I said. "And please print me the signature card for the secondary as well as any authorization forms bearing my name." He printed the documents and passed them across. My signature when I sign, deliberately, is spare and slanted, an economy of motion learned over contract seasons. The scrawl on the secondary card tried to mimic it, but overshot the slope and tightened where mine loosens. The capital E was a stranger. I traced the air above the paper, not touching it. Alder's face was tactfully blank. "I'd like to revoke that card effective immediately," I said. "And I want to move the current reserve into a new account with multi-factor authentication. No shared access." "Of course." He printed a revocation form and rotated it toward me with a capped pen. "Sign here and here. This will also invalidate any saved credentials connected to that card." I signed with my full name, Eleanor Marion Hale, each letter clear enough to be its own witness. The forms clicked through the printer, a domestic rhythm print slide sign stack. With each signature, I felt the small machinery inside me align, bearings finding their seats. "There," Alder said finally. "The secondary card is revoked. The reserve is migrated to a new account. I'm enrolling you in the bank's token system. You'll receive an electronic key that refreshes every 30 seconds. No transactions without it." He set the named envelope beside the stack new access devices, and I found myself grateful for the clumsy label. It felt like a door heavy and visible. "I'll need copies of today's actions for my records," I said. "We'll email secure PDFs within the hour and print everything for you now." He paused. "Eleanor, if someone close to you is exploring project management without your consent, this is the right move. You're not overreacting." "Good," I said, because it was easier than anything truer. "Please note in the account that all communication regarding Hale projects must go to me directly." He entered the note. We shook hands. In the corridor, the HVAC hissed in a careful whisper as if conspiring to keep matters tidy. I thanked the receptionist and carried the envelope to the car like an object that might shatter if I looked away. On my phone in the parking lot, Nadia's email had already arrived, a crisp 2-paragraph notice to Silva and Company on her letterhead requesting suspension of any disbursement or work ordered on the basis of the secondary instrument. "Please confirm receipt," and compliance it ended. I forwarded it to the address on Evan's text with my own brief line. "Following Council's notice, I, Eleanor M. Hale, do not authorize any draw on Hale projects. Direct all questions to me. I will make myself available for clarification." I added a read receipt. The petty part of me savored the button and pressed it anyway. I sat in the driver's seat and watched the email status bar crawl until delivered turned to read. 17 seconds. The confirmation from Silva and Company came 3 minutes later, signed by an office coordinator named Mira. "We acknowledge receipt. No draws will be processed without written confirmation from you. Please advise if you'd like to schedule a meeting to review documents." The relief was not relief. It was a plank placed across cold water. I drove home by a different route, not because it was faster, but because it had more traffic. I wanted to be carried by other people's errand currents for a while. At Maple Crest, the house was as I'd left it, coffee cup on the table, the list page blank except for a dot where the pen had rested. I rinsed the cup, wiped the ring from the wood, and carried the envelope to my small office. On the shelf behind my desk, 3 binders sat with labeled spines, taxes, property insurance. I pulled a 4th from the drawer, slid a blank label into the spine, and wrote, "Reserve Oswego" in block letters. Inside, I set a fresh pack of dividers and began with what I had: bank revocation, reserve migration token registration, Nadia's notice, Silva and Company acknowledgement. I printed the contractor, text the address, and stapled it to a page titled Communication Log. I wrote the time of Evan's call from memory and left a line after it for whatever came next. None of it felt like anger. It felt like carpentry measure twice cut once. Sand until the edge can be touched without drawing blood. Around 3, I texted Tessa. Me coffee at Larkspur, I'll be there at 4. Tessa, sure, I'm in the area. See you then. The heart casual in red made me close my eyes for a second. Then I put on a jacket and walked to the car. Larkspur Cafe on any Fremont had windows that made everyone beautiful for 15 minutes. I chose a table near the middle where the light would be honest. Tessa arrived at 4:07, hair knotted loosely, a navy cardigan softening her edges. She kissed my cheek and sat. How's your day? She asked, sincere as a weather report. Administrative, I said, and watched her face for the slight flicker the word usually produced. Today, nothing. She stirred her tea as if it needed attention. We spoke about small matters, her class project, a film she liked, whether I had finally replaced the back porch light. I let the ordinary do its work until it felt true. Then she said, as if remembering something curious she'd meant to ask weeks ago, Are your house funds okay? You've always kept those for projects. I was wondering if you're still using them. The casualness was a costume that didn't quite fit. It tugged at the seams. I lifted my cup. Everything is where it needs to be, I said. That's good. She looked out the window and back at me. I've been thinking, not everyone wants their life mapped in lists and timelines. Some people need a place that feels warm while it's being made, not just after it's done. The phrasing had Maeve's fingerprints on it, softened edges disguising a sharp object. I touched the rim of my cup and left my finger there until the heat forced me to move. Warmth is a good thing, I said. It's not the only good thing. She studied me as if trying to calibrate. Gran says you work so hard to make everything perfect that you forget how to enjoy it. Does she? She says the planning becomes the point. She would know about points. It was petty and I regretted it as soon as I heard it. I tried again. Tessa, do you like cooking with Maeve? She brightened. She makes it feel simple. She says measurements are suggestions if you're paying attention. I smiled in a way I hoped looked generous. That's one approach. She thinks I should have a place of my own to learn those things. Fail without someone marking the time. I set my cup down. The table had been sanded so many times the grain felt soft. Is that what this is about? I asked, not unkindly. I don't know. She looked suddenly like the little girl who used to crawl onto my lap without asking. I just want a place that feels like it's mine. And you think I don't want that for you? She didn't answer. The barista called out a name that wasn't ours. Plates whispered across wood. Tessa picked at the sleeve of her cardigan and then tucked her hand under her thigh like she used to do when she was nervous. I'll support you, I said. The sentence weighed more than it sounded. But support doesn't mean unlimited access to whatever seems easiest. She reddened. I didn't ask for unlimited. No, I said gently. You didn't. She took a breath, set her shoulders, and met my eyes with a steadiness that reminded me uncomfortably of myself. Are you okay? You seem different. I'm paying attention, I said. That's all. She nodded, unable to leave the question alone. So the reserves you still have those set aside? I held her gaze. Tessa, if you need something, ask me for it. Don't ask around it. She looked down at her tea as if it would offer cover. I was only wondering. We let the conversation drift into other channels, work schedules, a neighbor's dog, whether the city would ever fix the pothole near 29th. When she stood to go, she reached for me and I held her a second longer than I usually would. She smelled like flour and cardamom and the shampoo she'd used since high school. I wanted to say a dozen true things that would not, under the circumstances, be useful. I said, text me when you get home. Okay, she said, and left me with the soft echo of the door. I stayed until the light went from flattering to accurate. At home, the mail had come 3 catalogs, an insurance offer, and an envelope from Heritage Pacific with the secure PDFs on a thumb drive like a charm. I scanned them anyway, filed the copies behind the right tabs, and wrote a new entry on the communication log 4:52 p.m., email confirmation from Silva & Co., draw suspended pending authorization from EMH. Beneath it, I wrote 5:31 p.m., coffee with Teetle, notes, generalized questions about funds, references to Maeve, emphasis on own place. I don't know for whom I was writing, except that the page kept my hands from doing nothing. The phone buzzed at 7:12. Tessa home. Thanks for tea. Me, glad to see you. Sleep well. I carried the binder to the kitchen and set it on the table where the morning's notebook had been. The page in the notebook was still blank. I wrote 3 words, address, time, name, and left them without context. Next to them, I placed the small envelope with the security token and pressed my thumb against the plastic until the numbers lit and turned, then turned again. A little later, as dusk thinned to something paler, my inbox pinged. Mira at Silva & Cumby had replied to Nadia's notice with a formal acknowledgement and a line at the end. Our project manager, Evan Silva, is available tomorrow or Thursday to review all paperwork with you at our Canyon Road office. Let us know your preferred time. I forwarded it to Nadia with a brief, received, and closed the laptop. I washed the coffee mug. I put away the jacket. I turned off the overhead and left the lamp by the window burning, the one with the fabric shade that makes the room look like it remembers me. On the table, the binder lay closed, not hiding anything exactly, but keeping it in a shape I could pick up again without it spilling. The next morning, air hung cool and colorless over Canyon Road, the kind of gray Portland wears when it hasn't decided whether to rain. I parked at the far end of the lot outside Silva & Company and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The binder lay on the passenger seat, its labeled Spine Reserve Oswego clean as a verdict. I picked it up and went in. Glass and brushed metal made the reception area look like a showroom for restraint. A ficus with perfect leaves stood beside a credenza stacked with magazines about homes that photographed themselves. The receptionist Mira from the email rose with that useful combination of warmth and neutrality. "Ms. Hale," she said, not quite smiling. "Mr. Silva is expecting you. Conference room B." She led me down a corridor that divided the office like a parted hair. In the glass room, a long table waited with a carafe of water and a legal pad set at one place. Evan Silva entered a moment later with the rest of his face arranged professional, open, careful. "Thank you for coming," he said, offering his hand. His grip was steady without being proprietary. "We received your counsel's notice and your message. I want to make sure we handle this with accuracy." "Good," I said. I set the binder on the table and opened it to the tab that read Bank Actions. "You'll find today's account changes summarized here. The secondary instrument tied to Hale Projects is revoked. The reserve has been migrated to a new account requiring a physical token. Any draw requires my explicit authorization." He glanced through the documents, placing each sheet precisely on top of the last. "Understood." He slid a folder of his own across the table. "For transparency, here are the work order, the proposed schedule, and the authorization we had on file for the secondary card. We suspended procurement pending confirmation from the primary account holder. The authorization in their file tried to be my signature and failed by small telling degrees. The loop at the end of the H broke where mine would taper. The slope leaned forward as if late to its own appointment. I put my phone on the table and tapped speaker. "Nadia, we've begun." Her voice landed in the room like a spirit of jurisdiction. "Mr. Silva, Nadia Lynn, counsel for Ms. Hale. Thank you for your cooperation. We request that your company maintain the suspension on any disbursements or work orders associated with the Hale Projects Reserve. We will send you a formal acknowledgement of today's review for your records." "Thank you, Ms. Lynn," Evans said. "We appreciate clarity." Before he could say more, footsteps clustered in the hallway outside, then a soft knock. Mira opened the door and half-stepped in. "Mr. Silva, your guests are here." Tessa entered first, her hair in a polished knot, cheeks flushed with an energy that had nowhere to land. Maeve Archer followed in a jacket the color of new coins, her expression the good manners aversion of impatience. They took in the room, Evan at the end of the table, me beside the binder, my phone glowing with Nadia's name. Mom, Tessa said the question not about why I was there, but how I'd arrived ahead of the story she had been telling herself. "I thought this was a project meeting." "It is," Maeve said, directing the information toward the air. "Evan, we're reviewing tile and cabinet lead times today. It would be good to set a payment schedule that doesn't lag manufacturing. Installers are booking out." Evan didn't sit. He placed 2 fingers on the back of a chair, like a man steadying a ladder. "Ms. Archer." "Tessa, thank you for coming. Before we discuss materials, we need to address authorization. Ms. Hale is the primary account holder for the reserve that was listed for this project. At her instruction, we've suspended the draw." Color rose to Tessa's face as if someone had turned a dimmer the wrong way. "Suspended," she said, eyes skittering to me as if looking for a softer word. "You mean paused." "I mean suspended," he said without apology. Maeve's smile was a practiced, expensive thing. "We are moving along on a schedule that suits everyone's needs," she said. "Surely there's a way to continue while the family sorts out paperwork." Nadia's voice, calm and precise, came through the speaker. "There isn't. Any continuation would expose the firm to avoidable risk and my client to ongoing misuse. We will provide Silva & Company every document they require to keep their records clean." Tessa looked from the phone to me and back. "You called a lawyer?" She made the word sound like a personal slur. "I called Nadia," I said. "She handles my financial matters when they require more than common sense." A thin silence, the kind that only makes a room louder. Evan cleared his throat. "For our part, we cannot proceed without written authorization from Ms. Hale and verified funds. Until then, no orders will be placed, no crews scheduled. We hope for a resolution that allows everyone to feel respected." Maeve's mouth tilted in a line that was not quite a smile. "Respect is elastic," she said lightly. "It stretches to fit the reality. Eleanor, you have your way of arranging things. Some of us prefer a more generous approach." "Generous." I looked at the papers on the table, numbers that apparently expressed generosity by appearing in the right columns. Approaches differ, I said. Ownership does not. Tessa's chair scraped as she sat. This was supposed to be mine, she said not loudly, but with an ache that felt older than either of us. A kitchen where I can make mistakes without it being a problem. A place that isn't measured all the time. You make everything a checklist. I make things work, I said more quietly than I felt. It's the only way I know to keep the floor under us. Maeve reached and smoothed a crease in Tessa's sleeve that wasn't there. Don't let this derail you, she said. There are other ways to move forward. Nadia, dry as the edge of a ledger, said, not with Ms. Hale's money. Tessa's gaze snapped to the document with the counterfeit signature and then back to my face. I didn't sign your name, she said. The denial was reflexive, fast enough to sound like tripping. I didn't. You used a card tied to my reserve, I said. You told yourself a story in which that wasn't the same thing. Her mouth opened, then closed. The throat remembers what the face wants to forget. She swallowed and turned to Evan as if he might still be auditioning sympathy. He only folded the authorization back into its sleeve. Ms. Hale, he said, will send a memo summarizing the suspension and today's review. If you'd like, we can arrange a separate meeting to go over any questions about what's already been drafted. Please do, I said. He nodded to everyone in the room with the evenness of a referee ending a round. Thank you for your time, he said. This meeting is adjourned. Chairs made their brief, embarrassed noises. I slipped the papers back into the binder and tapped end on my phone. I'll be in touch, Nadia, I said into the air. And her absent of course felt like a hand on the back. In the hallway, the carpeting performed the polite fiction of softness. The receptionist's keyboard whispered. I reached the door before Tessa's voice caught up with me. Mom, wait. Outside, the lot shone with a light mist that hadn't yet committed to rain. Tessa's steps sounded wrong on the concrete, uneven and too quick. She caught my arm not hard. Her hand was cool. You didn't have to do it like that, she said, in front of them. You brought them, I said. She didn't argue. You could have trusted me. I would have liked to, I said. The binder in my other hand had a weight completely unrelated to paper. She pushed hair behind her ear and let her fingers linger there as if they could press back time. I wasn't stealing from you, she said. This was for me. For us, Gran said. Her voice snagged on the name. She said sometimes love looks like letting go of control. Maeve arrived at a measured pace the way people do when they believe the space bends to them. She stood with an elegant distance, the kind that looks like deference until you notice the angle. Let's not dramatize, she said to Tessa. We hit a bump, we'll reframe. Eleanor has always needed to oversee. It's who she is. People who step aside gracefully are remembered fondly. People who sign without permission are remembered differently, I said. Maeve's expression didn't change, but a small pulse beat at her jaw. You've always treated money like a measuring stick, she said softly, as if everything meaningful must pass a test. I didn't look at her when I answered. What passed were limits. Tessa's grip loosened and then returned like someone testing a doorknob they don't want to open. Please, she said, not theatrical, not strategic, just the word. Don't shut me out. I'm not shutting you out, I said. I'm stopping you from dismantling me. The sentence sat between us without echo. Somewhere down the block, a delivery truck released its brakes with a sigh. A gull marked a neat diagonal over the roofline and disappeared. Maeve glanced toward the street, calculation clicking behind her eyes like beads. I'll give you 2 a minute, she said, and her heels made an immaculate sound as she walked away. Tessa watched her go and then watched me as if measuring the distance between the two of us and wondering how it got so wide. I didn't mean for it to be like this, she said. I didn't think it through. That's true, I said. I didn't add, and you were helped not to, because I wasn't interested in giving either of us a simpler villain than we already had. She pressed the heels of her hands briefly to her eyes, then dropped them. You always make it sound so final, like a door, like it can't be opened again. It isn't a door, I said, it's a frame. The door hangs on it. She looked past me toward the glass where our reflections lined up like a demonstration. In the doubled surface, she seemed smaller and I seemed taller. I refused to read meaning in the optics. Am I supposed to apologize right now, she asked. Exhaustion balled under the question. You're supposed to tell the truth, I said. I wanted a place that didn't feel like I was being graded, she said. I wanted to belong somewhere that wasn't built out of your rules. When Maeve said she could help, it felt like breathing. And when she needed access, I said she used you as the key. Tessa flinched not because she disagreed, but because agreeing would be too much movement all at once. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked at the seam where asphalt met the concrete lip of the walkway, as if that thin line could instruct her. I can't talk anymore out here, she said after a while. I feel like I'm on a stage. We're in a parking lot, I said, but I understood. The air held the metallic smell of damp. My breath fogged once and then not at all. She let go of my arm. Are you going to? She stopped. Never mind. I waited. When she didn't finish, I said, send me a message when you get home. Her laugh was small and cracked. You always say that. I always mean it. She nodded and turned toward Maeve, who had taken shelter beneath the shallow awning near the entrance. tapping her screen with the pointed efficiency of someone rearranging a day in real time. Tessa walked to her and said something too low to hear. Maeve's reply occupied the air with a neat rectangle, then vanished. I unlocked my car and slid the binder onto the passenger seat. The cover caught the light and threw it back without decoration. As I pulled out, the wipers made a single dry pass and stopped. The road fed me into its slow current. In the side mirror, the building's glass steadied into a dull plane, where sky and parking lot and the backs of people appeared and dissolved without preference. I drove until the office was a thought instead of a place, and then kept going, not fast, but without hesitation, the way one leaves a threshold after all the standing has done its work. Rain finally decided itself that evening, a soft, steady sheet that sounded like someone turning pages in the dark. I moved through the house without turning on the overhead's lamp in the front room, a line of warm light in the hall, the refrigerator's square of white when I opened it and closed it again. The binder waited on the kitchen table, squared to the edge. I touched its spine the way you touch a rail while you're thinking. At 9:03, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't recognize the digits, but the city code was ours. I pressed play and heard a soft clatter, the rustle of fabric, then Tessa breathless, trying to keep her voice even. "You promised," she said. "You said the house was ours." A beat of air. Maeve's reply came brittle, the kind of patience that's practiced until it cuts. "Promises change with circumstances. I'm not underwriting childish decisions. Find another way." The line went dead. The recording time said 0:22. I let it play again, then a third time, until the silence after the last syllable felt heavier than the words themselves. Some mistake in the universe of pocket calls and recent contacts had sent the two of them into my kitchen. I slid the phone beside the binder and watched both objects as if one might explain the other. At 9:31, the screen lit again. "Tessa," I answered. "She doesn't care," she said without hello. Her voice pitched low and hot, outrun by its own momentum. "She called me foolish. She said, the rest jammed, then broke. I'm standing in a kitchen with a hole where the stove should be, and she told me to ask you for help if I want to practice being adult about money." I sat the chair's wood, answering me with a small groan. I heard the voicemail, I said, by accident. "Good," a small miserable laugh, "then I don't have to repeat it." Rain threaded the window. I let a breath settle. "Tessa, listen to me. You're not a spectacle, you're not a failure, you're in a mess. I can't go back to class looking like this," she said. "I can't go to Maeve's and pretend we're fine. I don't even know where to sleep tonight." "The guest room is made," I said. "If you come here, you sleep and you eat. In the morning, you meet me at the main library. We'll write down what's true and we'll sign what needs signing." She went quiet in that way she does when she's looking for a trap and finding none. "You're not angry." "I'm a person," I said. "I have the full set." I heard her exhale through her nose, almost a laugh, almost not. The rain taught the gutters their job. The house sounded older and dear. "Come," I said. "We can start." "I'll grab a bag," she said. "I'll be there in 20. She arrived, damp hair uncoiling at the edges, eyes rimmed from trying not to cry on the drive. I handed her a towel and a plate with something warm on it and didn't say anything that would make either of us defensive. She ate like someone remembering how. When she was done, she set the fork down carefully and said, "I'm sorry." I nodded. "We'll handle what we can say sorry for and what we can prove," I said, and she didn't flinch at the second part. Morning came clean. The clouds had lifted just enough to turn downtown a pale, practical silver. In the Marion Hay reading room, tables ran in 2 long rows under tall windows. The hush carried the sound of pages turning like a kind of weather. Tessa sat across from me, shoulders tucked, the stubborn set of her chin softened by the fact that she'd slept in our house and brewed coffee in my kitchen and left her damp shoes by the heater like a child. I opened the binder to a new tab and slid a sheaf toward her. "This is the repayment agreement Nadia drafted," I said. "Monthly installments you can carry on part-time work. No interest if you're on time. If you default, it escalates." She read each page. Her hand trembled once and then went still. "And if I sign, you start paying it down," I said. "Not because I'm trying to win, because this is money that left a place it didn't belong." She took the pen. "Do you want me to read it out loud?" she asked, a small bleak joke. "I want you to understand it," I said. She signed her name, careful and full length, Tessa Ann Hale, on each line, the blue ink making a neat version of a decision. When she finished, she pressed the pen back into the crease and held it there a second, like a weight. "Gran told me you loved houses more than people," she said. "Not a weapon now, just a report. That you cared more about plans than me." "I loved you by making plans," I said. "It wasn't a defense so much as a weather report of my own. You don't have to like my methods. You do have to stop letting someone else speak through you." She folded the signed pages and squared their edges. Her eyes shone but didn't spill. "Okay." We filed the copies at the desk downstairs, the clerk stamping dates as if blessing them. Outside, the air smelled rinsed. We walked 2 blocks without speaking and then parted she to class, she said, which I didn't challenge. Me to the bank to deposit a check I'd been ignoring, not out of neglect, but out of not wanting to do one more useful thing. Days arranged themselves. A message came with a picture, first month's rent in a small Montevilla studio receipt, crisp above a bare counter. Another, a screenshot of a schedule at PCC intro to personal finance highlighted. A third, a photo of a plastic badge clipped to a gray sweater, Lumen House SE Grand Tessa, smiling with the stiffness of someone trying to believe themselves into a role and almost managing it. I didn't flood her phone with replies. I sent what the images seemed to ask for seen. Good. Keep going. In the evenings when the house had its quiet back, I would open the binder and write a line in the communication log, not as evidence for a trial I hoped never to need, but as a way to set down the weight so the table could carry it for a while. Word travels in loops. From Oswego Lake, I heard what anyone could hear. If they passed the block slowly, the framing at Maeve's remodel stood bare tarps snapping on the wind. The contractor's sign had been tucked behind a shrub as if it were shy. Neighbors spoke in low voices about delays. The kitchen window that had been open was closed now. A single strip of painter's tape made an X on the glass where something had cracked. On Maple Crest, I walked in the blue hour and watched porch lights flick on one by one. A boy on a scooter dragged a foot along the pavement to slow himself, and the sound made an ache I chose not to name. At home, I rinsed a mug and dried it and put it back exactly where it lived. The small correctness felt kind, like giving a thing back to itself. Late one afternoon, the mail brought an envelope from Silva & Co., a memo memorializing the suspension, a clean list of what had not happened because it could not. I slid it behind the right tab and closed the rings. The binder had begun to look used in a way that felt like progress corners. Softened fingerprints made matte circles on the plastic, the label slightly crooked from being handled. I liked it better that way. The last light went thin. I pulled the ledger from the shelf, a real one heavy with years of entries in black ink, and opened to a fresh page. On the top line I wrote, Tessa Life Build Owner, Tessa Ann Hale. Under it, a single entry dated, Rent Month 1 received. I let the ink dry, then closed the book and returned it to its place. The room held still, not expectant, just present. Somewhere in the house, a pipe ticked as it cooled. The rain eased. I turned off the lamp, left the corridor light on, and stood for a moment in the quiet between them, the way you do when the structure you're inside of remembers how to hold. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.